Hello friends, my name is Jake Montanez and welcome to Right Shift. In this video I'm going to be taking a closer look at a story written by another author that I found on one of my Facebook writing groups, and I'm going to share my thoughts on its strengths and weaknesses and try to help correct some of the deficiencies that are present in the writing. Alright, so I've put up on the left hand side the original picture of the text that was provided by the author that I'm going to be critiquing, and on the right I've recopied all of it, typed it out myself in Google Documents just so I can make adjustments to it as necessary as I think that the changes need to be made. Just having that up as reference, I'm mostly focusing on what I've written here on the right hand side of my screen. Starting with this first sentence, I know I swore to myself and to my son I would never go back to who I was before, but I have no choice but to break that promise. That sounds very wordy and verbose, and it's not really something somebody says to themselves. It's something they would probably be thinking more than speaking aloud. I would probably change this to be a fragment of that and then reference the rest of it being part of the character's thoughts. So I'd probably leave it as I have no choice but to break that promise. So I'll change that right now. Also, I'm going to correct some of the grammatical mistakes because they frustrate me. The rest of this I would truncate and move to some sort of thought process. Right here, she said, lifting the lid, creaking as it ascended. It's a bit more than is really necessary to be written, so I would shorten this as well. I'm changing it to opening the creaking lid. Descended doesn't really make that much sense. It's not really moving upwards, you're opening the contents of the box, right? Watching over kind of implies that you're going to be sitting there for a while and observing what's going on, but what she's really doing is looking at what's inside of the box. Seeing the contents of the box in both disgust and recognition, that's also a bit goofy. It runs from talking about seeing the contents to whispering reluctantly and throwing in her statement in a very awkward fashion. So we're going to try to reword that a little. So I truncated it. I like that word truncate. It just means to shorten things up. The thoughts and feelings that she has for what's inside of the box initially. And then we're going to change Adelena whispered reluctantly, like meeting an old companion, hello friend. That just comes across as a little bit ham-fisted. Try to avoid stuff that goes along the lines of like meeting an old companion. I'm just going to do my favorite thing, truncate it. Adelena whispered, hello, old friend. End sentence right there. This whole reluctantly, like meeting an old companion, can be moved to somewhere else. So I'm going to change that reluctance and put it into this next sentence, which also ends with an onomatopoeia, just making the word there. I think the author here was trying to demonstrate showing and not telling, but not really understanding what showing and not telling is. Also with the final sentence in this paragraph doing the same sort of thing. So what I do when I'm writing is I reread my own stuff and try to figure out the things that I've liked about other authors. My favorite ones have been Tolkien and Terry Brooks and George Martin. And does my story meet the quality of writing that is present in what's going on in that story? If this sounds like a fourth grader level of writing, I'm going to try to up it a little bit. It's probably not fourth grader level writing, but it's pretty close when you're starting to throw in big words like this and capitalizing it overall, which just looks messy and gross. I'm going to change this whole point to say left hand shaking in fear and reluctance. That kind of pulls in the reluctantly that was in the previous sentence version and still kind of maintain that essence of the character Adelena not wanting to put her hand inside of this box. From the author's comments in the Facebook thread, they wanted to maintain that for suspense for later on in the story. This whole overall thing is the page 2 of chapter 3, I believe, of the story that they're writing. So there's no prior understanding of what's going on. I have no idea what's going on in this story. I just saw the snippet and thought it'd be a good idea to edit it. So left hand shaking with reluctant fear. You can see that I've kind of got corrections being provided by Grammarly. This is not what I want it to do. I don't want it to say handshaking. I'm not reaching across to somebody else to shake their hand. So I might want to rethink how this is written. Instead of shaking, I'll say quivering. That'll replace the word and take away the author's decision to want to change it to handshake. It still implies the same fear that's going on with the action while still creating that vibration of the hand that is going on for the character. Okay, moving on to this little section here. She grabbed whatever was in the box out, slamming the lid crash. There's a bunch of different things wrong with that. She grabbed whatever was in the box out. I'm not an expert on what's going on with grammatical terms and phraseology. I've left all that behind in high school and don't really care whether it's a past participle or other different I don't remember the phrases. I should probably learn the terms. I understand it in my head and I don't worry about it that much. She grabbed whatever was in the box out. That sounds horrible. She needed to remove the item that was in the box and then she slammed the lid lid with a crash that echoed across the room with dust flying through the cracks. So we're going to try to summarize all that. To shorten this to, she retrieved the box's contents and slammed the lid. I don't need to put in the word crash because slamming is going to imply that there's a loud noise when she does this. By retrieving the contents of the box, it preserves that need of the author to maintain the contents in secrecy while still getting rid of that really crusty whatever was in the box, because the Adelina knows exactly what's in the box. So there's no point in saying whatever it was. That object is a known quantity by the author and by the character in this paragraph. So there's no point in dancing around the fact. We just want the secrecy. So simplify it and just say the box's contents or something similar. Okay, looking at the next couple of sentences going on here, I'm just going to highlight them briefly. It echoed across the room with dust flying through the cracks. Adelina's footsteps clicked and clacked on the hardwood floor, leaving footprints behind. The door creaked open and closed again with a click. So there's a lot of clicking, clacking, and cracking going on, and I don't like to have similar words repeated multiple times in the course of a few sentences. It just seems really unprofessional, and it clashes with the way I hear things in my head. So it needs to be changed a little bit. So we've got cracks, clicks, and clacks, which is, I think, a good choice if she's got some sort of shoes that are going to make a click clack on the floor. That may have been spoken of earlier, but instead of clicked and clacked, I would just shorten this to click clack. That's a little bit of onomatopoeia that does work within the context of this sentence here and shortens it up to be more brief and more expressive in the way that it comes across when read. Still puzzling over this previous sentence here. It echoed across the room. I know that's referring to the noise created by the lid slamming down. It's also not very clear what the dust is flying through the cracks of. Is it the cracks of the floor? Is it cracks in the box? Is it cracks on the table? What is the dust flying from? I don't really know with regard to what's going on here. So I'm just going to try to come up with something on the fly and see what works for me. All right, so out of context, and I don't know what the author's original intent was, I'm changing this to the noise echoed across the room, causing dust to fall from the cracks in the ceiling. Adelina's footsteps click-clacked on the hardwood floor, leaving the footprints behind. So it leaves dust, but again, we've got footsteps and footprints behind. So I'm going to try to simplify that a little bit as well. Because we had the dust fall from the cracks in the ceiling, I can extrapolate that that's on the floor now, and it's debris from up above. So I'm going to change this to say, leaving a trail in the newly fallen debris. That way it's Adelina's footsteps click-clacked on the hardwood floor, leaving footprints behind. Okay, so Adelina's footsteps click-clacked on the hardwood floor, leaving footprints behind. I want to get rid of this repetition of foot and foot, just because it just seems a little bit messy. I'm going to change this to leaving a trail in the new debris. Its final sentence, the door creaked open and closed again with a click, has nothing going on with the rest of the paragraph. I would delete this preferentially unless this was intended to show that she has departed from the room. Again, I want to get rid of this onomatopoeia click anyway, so I'm just going to delete this whole sentence. So now we've got a much better paragraph structure. I know I swore to myself and my son I would never go back to who I was before, but I have no choice but to break that promise. I forgot to completely remove all of that, so I'm just going to delete that now. Because I said I would incorporate that previous fragment of the sentence as part of a thought process, I'm just going to imply that it was a thought. So now I've brought that back full circle. I have no choice but to break that promise, she said, opening the creaking lid. Remembering her past, she'd sworn to her son that she wouldn't go back. So that implies that she has something in her past that she doesn't want to return to, and it brings back that promise that she'd sworn to her son. If you looked over here at the original, I know I swore to myself and to my son I would never go back to who I was before. It gets rid of that all as a spoken fragment and puts it into a thought process instead. So now I'm going to reiterate what I've written into this new version of the paragraph. I have no choice but to break that promise, she said, opening the creaking lid. Remembering her past, she'd sworn to her son she wouldn't go back. With disgust and recognition at the box's contents, Adelina whispered, "Hello, old friend." Left hand quivering with reluctant fear, she retrieved the box's contents and slammed the lid. The noise echoed across the room, causing dust to fall from cracks in the ceiling. Adelina's footsteps click-clacked on the hardwood floor, leaving a trail in the new debris. Now I'm thinking about it, she probably was leaving. The door creaked open and closed again with a click, so I could probably try to incorporate that as she was leaving a trail in the new debris that she departed from the room somehow. It took 25 minutes to go through one paragraph. That's insane. In the second paragraph, it looks like Grammarly's got some nice little things here to make me sound more positive. It's probably going to no longer be relevant once I'm done evaluating it, but I'm going to read the next paragraph for you. The rich farmland on the outskirts of Montress supplied the whole city with enough food for the coming winter. Nevertheless, Quinn never got tired of the pristine beauty the fields provided, especially with the sunlight shining overhead. Looking over his bag, Quinn smiled confidently, thinking he might have packed well for the journey ahead. Taking a deep breath, Quinn mentally prepared himself for his first adventure outside Montress. Quinn took the scroll out of his pocket and examined it, thinking this piece of parchment must possess something really important for someone to go to great lengths to hide it. So the very first thing that is immediately telling is that this is all part of the second page of chapter 3, as I said earlier. And we have an immediate shift from following Adelena in the previous paragraph to some random bloke named Quinn, who we've never met at this point in this fragment. So there should never be a point of view shift from a character between one paragraph to another. And I don't know, there's nothing in here to really differentiate that. I would preferentially start a whole new chapter instead of doing this, depending on the amount of contents that were prior to this. Like I said, this is 2 pages into a chapter, so I probably wouldn't start a new chapter here. So I would either expand Adelena's story and continue on with that one rather than jumping to a new person entirely. But if it's absolutely necessary, I would differentiate this by adding some centered ellipses or something along those lines so that it's very obvious that there is a break in the storytelling and that's shifting from one point of view to another without having to say, hey guys, I'm shifting from one point of view to another. So we're just going to put that in here. All right, so now I've got something to break up what's going on here, and it's not going to be, or it will be as more obvious that there's a shift in the point of view. Now I've got that out of the way. Rich does not need to be capitalized. That's the first thing that's going to go, regardless of what else I do with this sentence, and get rid of an unnecessary capitalization. The rich farmland on the outskirts of Montress supplied the whole city with enough food for the coming winter. I'd like to think it supplies it for every upcoming winter. So we could probably just change the focus on that. See, I don't like outskirts of Montress, mostly because that's implying that it's butting up right up against the city. I don't know the city's layout or anything like that, but coming from an area where the farmland was outside of the city or surrounding the city or adjacent to the city, but not necessarily butting up against the city, I personally am inclined to change that to surrounding Montress or something along those lines. There's also this double the. So I don't like that. So I want to try to change up this phrasing here a little bit. Let's just say rich farmland surrounding Montress. Giving it back that capitalization I deleted earlier. It also gets rid of some extra verbiage here. Nevertheless, it's just an extraneous word. I don't like to have nevertheless unless there's a very good reason to have it. Taking in the sentence in its entirety, Quinn never got tired of the pristine beauty the fields provided, especially with the sunlight shining overhead. So we can probably incorporate the sunlight shining earlier in the sentence to make it look a little bit more variegated compared to the rest of the paragraph. And he never got tired of the pristine beauty. I'm going to call this admired. It's pristine beauty because I'm not going to leave the fields. We've already talked about the farmland. And the rest of the sentence actually becomes completely irrelevant. It simplifies what I'm telling you, and it shows that I'm talking about the farmland. So Quinn admired its pristine beauty. The fields provided, especially with the sunlight shining overhead, which I've already incorporated to the beginning of the sentence. So simplicity is probably best here. Looking over his bag, Quinn smiled confidently, thinking he might have packed well for the journey ahead. This contraction, while grammatically correct, is something a person would say rather than have written out. So to start with, my first initial correction before I change the rest of it is going to be to remove the contraction. He might have packed well for the journey ahead. Okay, so the gist of what this sentence is saying, looking over his bag, Quinn smiled confidently, is him reflecting over his preparations for this trip that he's going to be going on. So I kind of want to summarize it and fixate it more on that rather than what we've got now, thinking he might have packed well. I could change that to he reflected on his preparations. I don't know much about the journey ahead. I'm just going to probably leave that there for now. Taking a deep breath, Quinn mentally prepared himself for his first adventure outside Montress. What this is telling us is that he's never really been outside of the city before, and there's a little bit of hesitation possibly going on with him, and he's just trying to move forward with what he's got to do. Because I changed this word here to preparations, now I've got my duplicate pet peeve of preparations here and mentally prepared. So taking into account that concept or thought of reflection will probably make this sound a little bit better. So I've changed this from taking a deep breath, Quinn mentally prepared himself for his first adventure outside Montress, to hesitating because there's obviously some concern that he has for this trip. Quinn breathed deep, again, maintaining that deep breath that he's going on, but sticking it in as more of an action that's going on and making it unsure of his first adventure outside of Montress. So kind of maintains the essence of the situation, but removes that duplicate preparations that would have had with my own alterations and keeps the sentence structure a little bit shorter and a little bit more flowing, I think. Digesting this last sentence, there's a lot going on there, but it's also a lot of repetition here. Quinn took the scroll out of his pocket and examined it, thinking this piece of parchment must possess something really important for someone to go to great lengths to hide it. So I kind of want to shorten the heck out of it while maintaining the essence of it being an important piece of paper. So he took the scroll out of his pocket and examined it. We could probably just examine the scroll from his pocket somehow. You don't need to have this piece of parchment on here. That's just a replication of scroll in a different ways. All right, so the original sentence was Quinn took the scroll out of his pocket and examined it, thinking this piece of parchment must possess something really important for someone to go to great lengths to hide it. I don't really like the word really either, so I completely rewrote this entire sentence and split it up into two different ones. One saying someone had taken great lengths to hide the scroll Quinn retrieved from his pocket, so I'm still getting that essence of him taking it out of his pocket, but also maintaining the great lengths to hide it, right? And then as he examines it, he's wondering at its importance. You don't need to really say anything about that. He's thinking this must be really important. He's wondering why it's so important. So I simplified the heck out of it. Moving on to the third paragraph. My first journey outside Montress, carrying out a dying man's wish, delivering a parchment to some lady in a tavern in a neighboring kingdom, a scroll that supposedly leads to a relic people are willing to kill to possess. The only thing I have to protect myself is an amulet which summons magical armor and a sword, so no pressure. He summed up the events leading up to now. Okay, so this is a lot of, I like to call it thought mumbo jumbo. When you read it out loud, it doesn't really make any sense that somebody would say this to themselves out loud, let alone to anybody else. So it's also a lot of exposition dumping at the same time, and you don't really want to have a lot of exposition dumping going on in your story in the way that this author decided to do that. So I'm going to try to clean this up a little bit, make the verbiage a little bit more conversational. And that's not even really a conversation. I want to make it more something he's saying to himself, but at the same time creating that sense of introducing these concepts in a way that doesn't sound as much like an exposition dump as it does as originally written. Starting with this first sentence, my first journey outside Montress, carrying out a dying man's wish, delivering a parchment to some lady in a tavern in a neighboring kingdom. All right, so we're kind of getting a gist of what his quest is. He's fulfilling a dying man's wish. He's delivering this scroll that he was taking out of his pocket earlier. We've already created this instance of knowing this is his first journey outside Montress. Unsure of his first adventure, my first journey outside Montress. So I'd probably just delete that whole little part. He's talking to himself, presumably. I would maybe add this, at least for now, as a filler. Here I am, carrying out a dying man's wish, delivering a parchment to some lady in a tavern in a neighboring kingdom. He's going to travel an entire kingdom over. My brain immediately goes to, are there guards that protect this other kingdom? Is it another army that's going to be out there? There doesn't necessarily have to be an army. I'm just thinking in terms of like immigration or whatnot. Is there a border that this guy has to travel into? What kind of things is he going to come up against? Mentally, in my head, that's what I'm thinking. If it's the next town over, that makes a little bit more sense. Hey, I'm going over here to do this thing, but I've never been there before. It doesn't matter whether it's a neighboring kingdom or a neighboring city. The same gist kind of exists here. So he's delivering a parchment to some lady in a tavern at a neighboring kingdom. So what can I do with this? Let me think about that. There's a lot of some lady in a tavern in a neighboring kingdom. I would probably at least give the lady a name. It might be in an earlier portion of the story that I haven't got access to. Same thing with the tavern. This guy's literally leaving the city for the first time, going to a kingdom that we don't know of, to a tavern that has no name, to deliver to a lady that's got no name as well. So who is this going to be going to? We don't know as readers, and unless it's implied or told explicitly elsewhere earlier in the story, this would be a great position in order for the author to add something telling us what exactly this quest is involving. Who is he going to go see? So to start, I'm just going to say I'm delivering this because he's already holding this scroll in his hand, so I can imply through inference here that he's talking about the scroll that he's examining, wondering at its importance. Here I am, carrying out a dying man's wish, delivering this to a woman named Jane. I'm just using Jane as a placeholder. It could be Lady Eritrea or something along those lines. I don't really care. I'm not here to necessarily step on the footsteps of this author, but I wanted to at least give her a name of some sort. Instead of wondering about at a tavern in a neighboring kingdom, I want to lean more on the fact that the character has never been outside his own town before and say, I don't even know where this place is that I'm looking, and include that in what his conversation is saying here. It's not even a conversation. It's just him talking to himself. Okay, so I made some some assumptions, and I'm going to fix this too. Just going to call this Lady Eritrea. Why not? Here I am carrying out a dying man's wish, delivering this to a woman named Lady Eritrea. That creates a sense of lament for him. He doesn't know what he's doing. And then with my correction to the next sentence, I'm changing it to, he didn't even know where he'd find the tavern called Slim Pickens in Aduorna, because I'm going to assume that the author knows where the character is going. I'm making up a word to take that place, just like I did with the lady that he's going to go visit, as well as the tavern. But at least we now have a name that he's going to be looking for and a place that he's going to be looking for it. So it's not as blind for us as a reader to understand where the character is trying to go. We may not know anything about Aduorna or Slim Pickens, and that's fine. But in order for us to understand what the West is, we're doing that, but it's a less ham-fisted way of providing that information dump that I was complaining about at the beginning of the paragraph assessment, okay? Because I've broken up his speaking to himself, I'm going to have to reassess what's going on right here with a scroll that supposedly, again, I don't like how it's written, and obviously neither does Grammarly. He wants to get rid of the word that. I also don't like the word supposedly. It's not a great word to use in any sense of the essence of what's going on here, so I would delete that. But let me continue onwards with this. A scroll that supposedly leads to a relic people are willing to kill to possess. These are all like sentence fragments as well, which arguably is okay if you're thinking or speaking out loud to yourself, but I don't think most people think that way, I would hope. So we'll see how I assess this. The only thing I have to protect myself is an amulet which summons magical armor and sword, so no pressure. He's clearly trying to reassure himself that he can figure out what he needs to do, but he understands the pressure that he's under. In the end, I don't like this so no pressure, but at the same time, it kind of keeps it the way it needs to be. I also had intentionally left in this little space here between pressure and the period just to maintain continuity, which I would just delete that right now. Instead of being ham-fisted and throwing in, I keep using ham-fisted, I am sorry. The only thing I have to protect myself is an amulet which summons magical armor and a sword. I think that can be worked in as well as an action instead of him talking to himself saying out loud, and I'm going to put that in before he continues on with his otherwise rambling. All right, so I'm going to change that to summoning his magical armor and sword with his protective amulet. He reassured himself of his safety. So that is an action that the character is taking. It demonstrates what the amulet is supposed to do, and it shows that he was concerned about whether or not it would help him because it's the only thing he's got. That provides that reassurance that it is there to help him if he needs it in the future. This final bit is what we're going to be looking at next. A scroll that supposedly leads to a relic people are willing to possess, so no pressure. He summed up the events leading to now. That's just a restatement of everything that has already happened, deleting that immediately. And this last little bit is him talking to himself still, so I'm going to rephrase it so it doesn't sound so janky. I think it would be good to know what the relic is, but I don't know personally. I could put something in there, but this is obviously going to be the MacGuffin of the author's story, the relic that people are getting. Either that or the scroll itself is the MacGuffin. Either way, I'd like to know what this relic is that they're searching for. Is it a sword? Is it another amulet of protection? Is it some sort of magic spell? I don't know. I guess it's kind of irrelevant in the long run, but as the author, it would be good to know it and put that in here to help the readers understand what's going on here. I'm going to put in here something to imply the importance of this relic so that this so no pressure can be left in, because I do think that's something you would say to yourself as you're trying to talk yourself up as to what's going on, but the rest of it leading up to it just sounds so bad. I'll fix it. All right, so going back on that, I've changed it to people kill to possess that relic, and I've got the only directions. So it beefs up the importance of that scroll that he's got, as well as talks about the fact that he has a lot of pressure on his shoulders to try to get this scroll delivered to Lady Eritrea, as I've so called it. All right, so I've been recording this for approximately an hour because I'm staring at the screen, looking at all of these things and trying to run through it in my head. I would incorporate all of these thought processes as I'm going anyway, so it'd be a lot easier for me to edit. Trying to rephrase what another person has written does take a lot more effort because I'm trying to understand what the author was trying to get at, as well as there's a lot of gaps in the information that I'm provided by the fact that this is in the middle of a story and I have no pretext of what's going on. So I'm making my best guesses as to what the author is trying to say. But that doesn't mean I can't go back and assess read and changed into what I've written. And hopefully you can see that there's a lot of things that can be adjusted or rephrased or changed in the editing process process to figure out what would sound a little bit better, reorganize a couple of things, dropping out a lot of the onomatopoeia that this author was incorporating in their story, and try to beef it up and improved it a little bit, as well as fixing the kind of stilted dialogue in the few phrases that the author had put in there for the characters that he's got. If watching this editing process has been of use to you, I would appreciate it if you click like and subscribe on my channel, and hopefully I can bring some more editing fragments like this to you in the future so that you can help improve your own writing as well as helping you on your way to becoming a published author. Thank you for watching my video and have a nice day.